What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy Football Over Analysis. Today we're continuing our series going over the best and worst ADPs in every round of the draft. Today we're going to be talking about the guys in round 11. And with these late round picks, we want to be going after as much ceiling as we possibly can, but there are still a couple of interesting guys that offer really decent floors going in this range as well. So currently being drafted in round 11, we have Khalil Shakir, Zach Charbonnett, Mark Andrews, Bo Nix, Jayden Higgins, Stefon Diggs, Jalen Coker, Oronde Gadsden, Deebo Samuel, Chris Rodriguez, Tyrone Tracy, and Woody Marks. At the 11:01, we have Zach Charbonnett of the Seattle Seahawks, and Charbonnett last season was part of one of the most frustrating running back situations that I can ever remember seeing in fantasy football. Charbonnett last year finishing as the RB24, and while Charbonnett never looked particularly explosive like Ken Walker did, he did manage to get almost all of the valuable goal line touches, Charbonnett finishing with 12 on the season. Now the situation in Seattle is very different from what it was a year ago. Clint Kubiak is gone. He's now the head coach of the Raiders. And Ken Walker is also gone. He's now the RB1 of the Chiefs. Charbonnett, however, is recovering from a torn ACL, and it's not clear when he'll be able to return to the lineup. So if you draft Charbonnett right now, you're going to need to put him on an IR spot, or if your league doesn't carry an IR spot, then you're going to need to carry him as dead weight on your bench for probably at least half the season. And I can't say that either one is even if you do have an IR spot in your league, I find that it's very rare that drafting and stashing an injured player ever really ends up working out that well in fantasy. Also, I don't like starting out my season with my IR spot filled up because I know as the season goes on, I'm going to need that IR spot for a bunch of different guys throughout the year. And just look at all the injuries that we've had in the NFL purely from training camp alone so far. So even if you draft a team and your team is healthy going into week 1, chances are they're not going to be healthy when you get to week 2. So I'm just not big on drafting and stashing a guy like Charbonnett. Even when Charbonnett comes back, I don't know that his ceiling is going to be all that great. Even though he was the preferred running back in Seattle last year, it still only led him to an RB24 finish. And that's not something that I really think we need to chase at this point in the draft. At the 11:02, we're going to have another fade in this round, and that is Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. Shakir has put up very identical stat lines in each of the last 2 years with 76 and 77 receptions and 4 touchdowns. He's finished as both wide receiver 36 and wide receiver 37. And he's just kind of an unexciting floor play that, yes, you could plug him in as a wide receiver 3 or a flex play, and he could give you a passable 10 to 12 point stat line on any given week. But there's just no ceiling for a guy like Shakir, especially not when the Bills went and added another target to the mix in DJ Moore this offseason. So Shakir is fine for what he is, but at this point in the draft, I want to be chasing ceiling. I want to be chasing upside. I don't really have use for a guy who's just purely a floor play with no ceiling whatsoever. At the 11:03, we have yet another fade, and I promise that this round is going to get better after this spot. But for right now, we have to talk about Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. And Mark Andrews has really declined quite a bit over the last few seasons. It's been some time since we've seen the days where Mark Andrews was a guarantee for over 100 targets, 1,000 yards, and a great red zone role. Andrews over the last 3 seasons has capped out at 70 targets. He's got no more than 673 yards. And while he did have 1 year where he was able to run hot with touchdowns and score 11, the other 2 seasons he scored 5 and he scored 6. So Mark Andrews at this point isn't anything more than a big name, really. There's going to be some weeks where you feel good about streaming him, but there's also weeks where he's just going to give you 0 floor and tank your lineup if you try to go with him as your every week starter at the tight end position. I do think there are a couple of positive things that are worth bringing up about Andrews. For one, Isaiah Likely is now out of the picture. Likely was a guy who was such a major red zone factor that there's no doubt that he took away some work from Andrews in that department. Likely, who was good for 5 or 6 touchdowns in each of the last 2 years, those opportunities could now go back to Andrews. And then you also have new offensive coordinator Declan Doyle, who comes over from the Ben Johnson tree. This could add some new fresh concepts, fresh ideas to the offense that could potentially reinvigorate Andrews a little bit. But ultimately, Andrews is a guy that I think we've started to see the cliff on over the last few years. It's been pretty clear that he's been in a decline, and it's hard to really feel good, even in this range of the draft, about drafting an older guy that has obviously seen his best days come and go. At the 11:04, we have Bo Nix of the Denver Broncos. And Bo Nix has gotten off to a good start in his career with back-to-back QB7 finishes. Nix offers that great floor with his rushing ability. He's run for 4 touchdowns and 5 touchdowns in each of his first 2 seasons. And anytime you have a quarterback that's going to threaten to score at least 5 times, if not more, then that's going to make their floor so safe and to make it so easy for them to finish in the QB1 ranks. You also feel that Bo Nix could do better as a passer. He hasn't hit the 4,000 yard mark yet. He also hasn't hit 30 touchdowns yet. Maybe that changes this season now that they brought in a guy like Jalen Waddle. And while Jalen Waddle is a fade for me in fantasy, I do think that he's a great real-life addition for Bo Nix, and Bo Nix is the one part of this Denver offense that I would want exposure to. So again, Nix, with back-to-back QB7 finishes, currently being drafted as the QB15, I think he's being drafted well below his floor, given the fact that he's got great upside as a rusher, and there's also untapped potential there in the passing game. And part of the reason that he's ranked so low this season is because he is coming off that injury he suffered in the playoff game last year. But there's been zero indications through training camp in the offseason that Nix is in danger of missing any time to start the season, nor is there any indication that he's going to be limited in any way. So I'm perfectly fine with Bo Nix as a late-round quarterback option. I think it's much more likely that he finishes as a QB1 than he finishes as a QB2. Again, this is a guy that's tied to a very good offense, and he's got plenty of weapons to work with, and he offers rushing upside. Those are all recipes for a QB1 finish. At the 11:05, we have Jayden Higgins of the Houston Texans. Higgins finished his rookie year as the wide receiver 47 with 41 receptions for over 500 yards and 6 touchdowns. He really showed signs of breaking out late in the season, and that momentum has carried over into the offseason, where Higgins has constantly gotten praise from head coach DeMeco Ryans, and Ryans has repeatedly said over and over that Higgins looks like a guy that's ready to take a year 2 leap. The downside to Jayden Higgins is going to be his offensive environment. CJ Stroud has struggled ever since his rookie season. He hasn't been able to recapture what made him so special in that first season. The Texans also have an elite defense, and they're going to be in a lot of run-friendly game scripts. So I think there's going to be times this year where there's not enough passing volume in Houston to support both Nico Collins and Jayden Higgins. But on the positive side of that, Nico Collins has also been a guy that has really struggled to stay healthy. He's never made it through a full 17-game schedule in his career. And any stretch of time that Nico Collins were to miss would give Jayden Higgins contingent wide receiver 1 upside. So in the 11th round, I think Jayden Higgins is an excellent pick. He's a guy that is a young, ascending, second-year wide receiver. He's going to have standalone value. And again, he's going to have that contingent wide receiver 1 upside if Nico Collins were to miss any time. At the 11:06, we have Stefon Diggs of the Washington Commanders. Diggs last season, in his only year with the Patriots, finished as the wide receiver 17 with over 80 catches, just over 1,000 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And this was not prime Stefon Diggs that we saw last year. The Diggs that we got was a Diggs coming off of a major injury on the wrong side of 30 and with a new team. And in spite of all those factors, Diggs still found a way to be productive and deliver a wide receiver 17 finish. So Diggs in Washington finds himself in a situation where he's firmly the number 2 receiver behind Terry McLaurin, but it's still a role that he should be plenty productive in. I think this is a situation where Diggs could easily replicate the numbers that he put up for the Patriots a year ago, which again, 85 catches, 1,000 yards, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 touchdowns. So Diggs here in the 11th round is the rare case of a guy that offers both a floor and a little bit of ceiling. Given the cost between the two, I think Stefon Diggs in round 11 is a far better pick than going Terry McLaurin in round 4 or round 5. So absolutely I'm in on Stefon Diggs at this point. I think he's a great pick in this range of the draft. At the 11:07, we have Jalen Coker of the Carolina Panthers. And Coker is an interesting guy. He's a guy that is a young player that has shown some flashes in each of his first 2 seasons with the Panthers. But ultimately in this range, I just don't see much of a ceiling for Jalen Coker. He's going to be held back by the Bryce Young situation. Bryce Young, again, a guy who has struggled just to hit the 3,000 yard and 20 touchdown mark in the first few years of his career. There's going to be some weeks where Young plays okay, but in the bad weeks, the weeks where he's struggling to get even to just 200 passing yards, when that happens, he's just going to drag down the stat lines of all the Carolina pass catchers with him. Ted McMillan himself last year had 8 games where he had less than 50 yards receiving, and if that happens to a guy like McMillan, then a secondary piece in that passing game like Jalen Coker is going to have an even lower floor some weeks than McMillan did. So at this range of the draft, I'll pass on a guy like Jalen Coker. I just don't think there's a lot of ceiling here, and in redraft, that's what matters most. I like Coker a lot more in a dynasty setting where, in the long run, maybe the quarterback situation can improve and bring out more of a ceiling for him, but in redraft, I just don't think that there's a lot of reason to touch him. At the 11:08, we have Oronde Gadsden, and Gadsden, a major fade at this point in the draft. Gadsden is a guy who, initially, when Mike McDaniel went to the Chargers, you thought that there really might be a ceiling here given how well McDaniel has used the tight end position during his time in Miami. Instead, the Chargers go out and they add both David Njoku and Charlie Kolar, and now there's reports in training camp that Gadsden's working with the third team, so I just don't think there's any path to any real fantasy significance here. He's still being way overdrafted in this 11th round, and honestly, Gadsden is a guy that I would have on the waiver wire. I wouldn't touch him, period, in a redraft league right now. At the 11:09, we have Deebo Samuel of the 49ers. Deebo back in San Francisco after spending a year with the Commanders. Obviously, we know Deebo is a good fit in the San Francisco offense. He spent the best years of his career under Kyle Shanahan. The question with Deebo is how much of a role is he actually going to have in his return to San Francisco? And if the 49ers had their way, their best case scenario outcome, I think it would be Dejon Stribling, their second round pick, stepping up into that wide receiver 2 role and getting a firm hold on it. I think they would prefer more to use Deebo as a gadget-type player, a third receiver that mixes in a bunch of specialized packages, but not necessarily somebody that gets featured week to week. But with this 49ers team, injuries just have a habit of popping up all over the place, and number 1 receiver Mike Evans is a guy who struggled to stay healthy last year, and he's already had a couple of issues with soft tissue stuff in training camp. So I think that there will be times over the course of the year where it's necessary for the 49ers to feature Deebo in their passing game, maybe a little more than they intend to. I think Deebo is going to be playable as a flex play throughout the season, and I don't think he's a bad pick in this range, but there are guys with larger floors and higher upside, like Stefon Diggs, like Jayden Higgins, that go in this range that I would just prefer. And for the final 3 picks in this round, we're going to talk about all 3 of them together because they're all in similar situations and I have similar thoughts for all 3. We have Chris Rodriguez, Tyrone Tracy, and Woody Marks. All 3 of these guys come in as the RB2s on their respective depth charts, while the roles for some of them are a little different, like Chris Rodriguez figures to be the goal line guy, and Woody Marks figures to be a passing down specialist. Tyrone Tracy, though, is the only one of these 3 that I have any kind of interest in, and it seems as though the Giants may do more of a backfield split than we initially thought going into training camp. They've listed both Tracy and Cam Skattebo as co-starters, calling them 1A and 1B. And they've also come out and said that they want to be a run-first offense. They want to run the ball as much as possible. They want to limit the passing volume. And with Cam Skattebo, as exciting as he is, you just can't give him an insane amount of touches. So the possibility exists that there's going to be some standalone value here for a guy like Tyrone Tracy. For Chris Rodriguez and Woody Marks, though, I don't have a lot of interest in either one of those guys. Rodriguez, there's been a lot of talk that he's going to be the primary guy on the goal line, which does give him access to some of the more valuable touches at least. But if he's not scoring touchdowns, then he's still probably not going to be getting a high amount of yardage. Like, it sounds like Bashal Tutin's going to be the guy between the 20s. LaQuint Allen's going to be the guy on passing downs. So if Rodriguez isn't getting a ton of early down work, he's just limited primarily to vulturing touchdowns away from Bashal Tutin, then there's only so high of a ceiling that he can reach. And for Woody Marks, he really needs a David Montgomery injury to have a chance at being fantasy relevant. Last year, Marks did get a chance to audition for a larger role when it was just him and Nick Chubb on his last legs out there in the Texans' backfield. And Marks was so impressive that the Texans decided to go out and trade for a proven option like David Montgomery. But really, in this range, I don't have any interest in any of these 3 guys. If I'm going to take a running back that's on the second string in his team, it's going to be a guy like Keaton Mitchell, who's going in the next round, who we'll get into in the round 12 video. But that's going to do it for this one, guys. So again, in this range, round 11, I think it's a great range to be targeting your late round quarterback and late round tight end. In this round, we had a guy like Bo Nix going off the board. Tight end, this is still a prime spot if you want to get somebody like Chikakonkwo, who doesn't go until the next round, who, again, we'll talk about him in the round 12 video. But outside of Bo Nix, my favorite picks in this round are definitely Stefon Diggs and Jayden Higgins. With those 2 guys, you both have a certain amount of floor and a little bit of ceiling, which is very hard to come by in this stage of the draft. If you miss on those guys, then you're looking at just uninspiring picks like the Chris Rodriguez, Tyrone Tracy, Woody Marks tier, or guys like Oronde Gadsden or Jalen Coker, guys that just don't have any ceiling whatsoever to offer you. But I thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please consider leaving a like and subscribing, and we will talk to you next time when we go over the guys in round 12.